Janet, that was a great session. Very, very high energy, and I tell you what, every one of your panelists has made a significant contribution to this ecosystem. So, thank you. Look, I'm going to take Haley's advice quite seriously. I mean, we suffer from the same issue ourselves. Often we've got a whole bunch of Kiwis in our business in Singapore, and one of the things we suffer from is sometimes we just don't self-promote. And I'm gonna take that hat off, and I'm gonna say all I heard all day was ecosystem. That's what I heard all day. I don't know if you guys know who we are, but we are the ones who organized the event. We are a tech research and advisory firm, so if you don't need research and advice on how to break into these markets, we do a lot more than running events. We're not actually an events management company. So moving on, I've got the pleasure of introducing someone. I think he doesn't really need an introduction. I think most of you know Graeme, but I'm going to take I'm going to take 2 minutes to introduce him, because one of the things I'd like to share is when we started the company Ecosystem, it wasn't just, the name wasn't just based on, let's get a cool name that demonstrates that we're going to capture the world. No, it wasn't. It was this deep ingrained sense that I had personally, that I had been helped through my life by a lot of people. And one of the things that I realized sitting in a hotel lounge in Kuala Lumpur, I was just sitting there having, sipping a beer, and I thought, one of the only things I've learned, because I'm not really rich, but one thing I've learned is built some great relationships and some great people along the way. And Graeme's one of them. He's just like the rest of the people in the room. He's a humble Kiwi. You know him as the CEO of NZTech. I also know Graeme as a very well-regarded international thought leader, in case you didn't know that. Graeme has been in global leadership roles with a global analyst firm that we compete with now. In the past, having run businesses in Europe, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand. So I think he's got a lot of insight, and I'd love to hear from Graeme on what's going on in the Kiwi tech scene. Graeme, over to you.
Thanks, Amit. So hello to everyone. To those that don't know me, I am running an organisation called NZTech, and NZTech is the not-for-profit industry voice for technology. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that briefly, and then I'm going to run through just a couple of slides on what we're doing as NZ Inc. with NZTech and the government to help showcase New Zealand's innovation. So what we did with NZTech is we found that the country was very fragmented and we were having trouble telling our story. So we became sort of the Star Alliance of tech industry associations. So now we've brought together 23 tech industry associations into one group, which is all membership funded. It's not paid for by the government. There's over 1,500 members. They started off being IT firms, but now we have all the banks, almost all the banks, universities, large agribusinesses in New Zealand, you name it, everyone wants to be part of tech nowadays. And you can see we've got a bit of an alphabet here. We've got agri-tech, biotech, FinTech, EdTech, HealthTech, GovTech, etc. And then we cover off various technologies. And each of these groups runs as a separate industry association, but they're all connected on one ecosystem. So it turns out we're well connected. The next thing we had to do was tell our story. How do we, now that we've got better connected, how do we tell the world and New Zealanders how good we are at tech? This is a piece of work from NZTE and NZ Story Group. And when we look back, they found that we've been doing this for ages. We just haven't been very good at telling the story. So we invented the airplane. No, not many people know that, because the guys that flew their plane up in America had a better PR agent. But apparently down here in New Zealand, we flew the plane first. We've heard about the McLaren. We've heard, I don't know if you know, but Glaxo came out of New Zealand, invented the syringe, disposable syringe, all the way through to rocket labs sticking rockets up into space for less than $5 million a pop. So we have just this culture of innovation, and we know that. We've got a great deep R&D ecosystem, but we haven't done a very good job of telling that to the world. So a couple of years ago, we were doing some work with NZ Story, which is the government agency, part of NZTE, that looks at how to help the exporters tell their stories internationally. And we started to look at the tech sector. We'd been doing a really good lot of work through the years on agriculture and education. So we started working with them on the tech sector. And the first thing they do is let's get some perception research. So they now do constant research. They've been doing it recently up in China and Japan and other Asian markets. And so they ask the questions. They go out into the markets and they ask the question, what do you think about New Zealand? What do you know? And as you've heard all day today, everyone knows about hobbits. They know that we make some movies down here, that we've got a beautiful country and everyone wants to come and visit it, that for some nations that we're pretty good at sport, that there's lots of sheep and cows and we produce nice food. And across the world, it was consistent, whether you went to South America, up into Asia, over into Europe. For those that had heard of New Zealand, that's how they perceived us. They had no sense. If we said, do we do technology? It was like, no, same as what Hayley said 2 years ago. Asked someone in Singapore about New Zealand and technology. It was like, the what? Cows, sheep, technology? Nope, don't get it. But what we found in the research is that if you say, oh, right, so you think we're good at food. Do you think we'd be good at technology in the food tech space? Do you think we'd have good agri-tech? Yeah, you must do. You've got the best food. Do you think we're good at movies? Do you think we'd be good at sort of video effects and digital productions? You must be. You made Lord of the Rings. Of course you must be. So we found that there was a very quick thread back to tech. It was too big a leap to say you send rockets in space. No one even believed that in Japan. It's like, yeah, okay, tricks. But everyone could make that leap, that if we were good at something, tech was probably underpinning it, and so therefore they'd accept that we were good at tech. So what that stimulated was a bunch more work to start telling that story outwards, and I'm just going to hopefully flick this button here and share a little video. Some of you will have seen it. It's only a couple of minutes long, but I think this is a bunch of New Zealanders from around the world sharing New Zealand's story.
New Zealand has so many gifts to the world. If you talk to anybody who's been there, it's a magical place.
I just love flying in and seeing how green the place is. It just takes me all the way back to my childhood.
We're not just a country of beautiful mountains, we're so much more than that. Historically, we've just done things that other countries haven't done before.
New Zealand is a great place to make things, to initiate ideas.
And to take those ideas and share them with the world drives a huge part of the New Zealand culture.
We have ingenuity that allows us to be creative and bring it to the world with limited resources, and we do that here in New Zealand all the time.
We're launching rockets in New Zealand. How cool is that?
Right now in the world, there's 2 companies delivering satellites to orbit. Elon Musk and SpaceX, and there's Rocket Lab.
New Zealand is right in there. The capability they've created is paradigm breaking.
And it's all happening out of Mahia, New Zealand.
New Zealand brings together both technology and creativity, and that's why we're so good at innovating.
You know, a lot of people, when you say creative, they think arts. But you can create in engineering. You create things where there was nothing, and that's an incredible thrill.
And at Google, we love Kiwis because Kiwis come up with ways to solve problems in ways that people from other places wouldn't necessarily even attempt.
Best in the world at producing eccentric inventors. The whole America's Cup thing, you know. There's a guy up in Warkworth that had the idea of turning the centerboards into hydrofoils, and look at them now.
We think outside the box and then just get on with it.
And if we don't know how to do it, we figure it out.
You're looking for people who are just going to make things happen. New Zealand research on information retrieval was one of the core pieces that made Google successful.
And New Zealanders solve huge global healthcare problems.
We have some of the best doctors in the world. I should know.
We do extraordinary things on the world stage around healthcare. We're arguably the cleverest country on the planet.
We have very talented people who succeed in many technologies. Whether it's marine, screen, software, we innovate.
Technology is soaring there. Look at the movies they make.
They do the best visual effects ever.
It's the best content on the planet. Warner Brothers invested in New Zealand because New Zealand's reputation is second to none.
The world has got a lot to learn from New Zealand in terms of the way that we invent technologies and look after each other as well. And that's what makes us different, I think.
We have a collective responsibility to our land and to our future generations, which in Māori we call kaitiakitanga.
We're on a mission to make better things in a better way and tread more lightly in the way that we make products, to be thoughtful about the environment.
And when you think about the power that a small country can have in influencing the rest of the world, I think New Zealand does sit there.
We dare to dream. Everybody has belief that they can change the world, because we have and we will continue to do so.
So that's a really nice piece of work by NZ Story, which is the government agency that helps tell these stories. Off the back of that, we started to create a tech story. So that's a bunch of very inspiring Kiwis, and it makes you feel good as a Kiwi, but how do we connect with the world? So we've been working through, we've just recently done one on an agri-tech story, which is helping position New Zealand's agri-tech products and services into different markets around the world. We launched this one up a couple of years, or a year and a half back, which is an Upstarters campaign, working with NZTE and NZ Story again. This was really about focusing on the people and the trends that are coming through the research and through the work that's been done to showcase New Zealand's tech overseas, that a lot of it's coming back to being good. It's good people doing good things for the world. And you're starting to see that pick up, that momentum pick up, that we're being recognised for off the back of things like the wellbeing budget and some of the work that we're doing outside of tech around the world, that New Zealand tech is there to support good things for the world. The other thing that's happening is that in partnership with Callaghan, this is run by Callaghan Innovation, starting to aggregate these stories of the companies into one place so that we can point them at the world a lot easier. So if you haven't been to Scale Up and you've got a tech startup or a scaling up company, get it onto here. There's already, within a couple of months, there's already over 900 companies on here, and this is the platform to promote it to the world. And I won't go through all of these, but there's a lot of good companies. Some of them you know, some of them you don't. And I was going to share some of these because we've got some international guests here, but one of the things that really intrigued me is that was just touched on in the previous conversation, right, about the entrepreneurs or the people selling out you don't hear about. TSG, Transaction Services Group, for example, you may or may not be aware, but they just sold for over $1 billion. So that's one of New Zealand's FinTech companies, recently acquired for over $1 billion. You would have, if you'd seen it, they might have had a little press release in the media, but they're not making a song and dance about it. They're going through the process. A private equity firm up in England acquired them. They're a platform for gyms and other small businesses to take payments from their customers. $1 billion. Grinding Gear Games is a video game. It's not a FinTech. It's a video game company in New Zealand that just sold recently for over $100 million. So there's a lot of good businesses being built. These are all big businesses that are progressing through capital and going big worldwide, and most of them you may not have heard of. Just thought I'd share this slide. I did a presentation a couple of weeks back in the Netherlands about New Zealand's innovation system, and this is the slide that everyone wanted to talk about afterwards. This is a quote from our Prime Minister. It really encompasses what we're saying there, is that we're getting a reputation around the world for doing good, for being good, and that our tech supports that. So she pointed out that we don't have to be the best place in the world, but we can be the best for the world. And that kind of stuff, being good for the world, is part of the marketing that's picking up a pace around the world. And with that, I will step back and allow Amit to come up here and run a panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Graeme. Right, if I could request the rest of the panelists to join me. So I've Sopnendu, got Mitchell Pham, who's just flown in from Auckland. Welcome, Mitchell. He's the chair of NZTech, also the chair of Augen, and of course FinTech New Zealand. And then we've got Hui Win from Enterprise Singapore. All right, I made some notes along the last couple of sessions on my phone, so I might refer to those. But look, before we go on with the panel, the one thing I'd like to do is just take 30 seconds and acknowledge the two nations and people from Singapore and New Zealand for having done a tremendous job with very limited resource, limited populations, and what we've achieved. I really think we deserve a big applause for that. So, yeah, and it's tremendous to see the kind of work that's going on in New Zealand and the aspirations companies are starting to build, despite the fact that you're so far removed from geographically, but you're bridging that with technology. So it's really great to see that. Now, I mean, it's a couple of points I wanted to make, and that will lead into some of the questions for the panel. One of my observations has been that if you look at any companies that have made a very significant impact or have achieved unicorn status, and pick any one of them, by design or by default, they have had a huge impact on people in different ways. And I think one of the things that it would be good to get a perspective on, do we see enough focus on, what's the impact that we're going to make as a company, as opposed to what's the solution, what's the problem statement that we're trying to solve in terms of a point solution. Because the point solution, and I think when I listen to Sopnendu, and that's one of the reasons a lot of people listen to you globally, is because when you address technology, and maybe I'll pose this question to you then, when you talk about technology and innovation in FinTech, I don't hear you talk about a point solution. I hear you talk about solving a problem for a community or a nation or people or businesses. Do you think, not just in New Zealand, in other markets as well that you visit, do you think there's enough focus from founders on solving those problems? And do you think that you're seeing enough of that?
I think the question is a good question, because FinTech, I think if you look at the genesis of FinTech, it started from this need. When the post-global financial crisis happened, banks withdrew from the segment which they were lending, and it created a huge market gap for those community who have stopped getting credit. So by design, FinTech was there to solve a problem post-global financial crisis. And they indeed solved that problem by extending credit through smart models, smart technology, and that's the inherent nature of FinTech. What happened post that was that they used the same technology. In fact, there was a question, one of the panelists was saying we should define what FinTech is. And in 2015, when we in Singapore started FinTech journey, we spent 6 months defining what is FinTech means for us as a country, what FinTech means for the global community. And it's a good thing to do for New Zealand to think about it, because sometimes FinTech is highly misrepresented in many forms. At least for us, it was a simple definition. Wherever technology is used to transform the business model and can help to get the financial service to be served in a more efficient way, that's FinTech for us. Whether it's capital market, insurance, pension plans, payments, doesn't matter. So we kind of expanded that definition, and the core of that principle behind this was solving people's problem.
Any sort of anything to add there from a New Zealand perspective, Mitchell or Graeme? We'll give Mitchell a chance because he's just flown in. Graeme and James have spoken on the FinTechNZ from FinTechNZ and NZTech's perspective.
Great, thank you. I think the New Zealand approach to FinTech at the moment is to bring a whole lot of innovators who are doing various different things that are really great together into a cohesive community that could start to work together, that could start to explore synergies and so forth, trying to close the gaps between startups and incumbent organizations, and then also trying to work with the New Zealand government around regulations and support around the innovation ecosystems and so forth. So I think up until this point, we have been looking at FinTech through a community lens to kind of just come together and start to work together. But I think now is a good time to start looking outward, and this definition or defining exercise is really important, because now that we've come together, we'll continue to do more what we've been doing, but now we should really start to look at what does New Zealand FinTech mean, not just inside New Zealand, but to the rest of the world? And so I think a similar exercise would be a great thing to do.
So from a collective standpoint, I mean, it obviously seems like the ecosystem within New Zealand seems to be growing very actively. There's more and more companies that are coming in, and Graeme, what are some of the things that are driving that sort of cohesive approach towards, building a better, greater story for New Zealand?
I think it's a momentum thing. When we had a very fragmented ecosystem, there was nowhere to go, so everyone tried to do their own things. It's a bit like creating a pearl in an oyster, right? Once the first bit of sand stuck in the nice layer started to form around it, then it starts to turn into something. So the momentum is coming through the fact that by getting together, we can start to create a voice. We can start to identify our strengths, identify how to work together in international markets, how to collaborate with government, so that it feels like the time is right. Like we've always, in the sector, we've always known that the weightless economy was going to be an advantage to New Zealand, but in an agricultural society predominantly, it was hard to sort of shift the thinking. But as the momentum starts to build, we're even seeing it, backwash into the agricultural sector now. And so FinTech is one of the leaders in that space because it makes more. It's always been sort of weightless anyway, so it's been able to pull the other groups forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's a question I wanted to pose to Pham, and I know this is your second panel today. So you opened today with being on a panel and on the enhanced partnership. So I think it's a good way to close that off. There's from a sectoral collaboration standpoint, I know that Singapore and New Zealand have had some very deep collaboration in areas such as agri-tech and health tech and healthcare. I mean, you've sat through most of the day and you've listened, and are there some key learnings from within those two ecosystems that have worked really well between Singapore and New Zealand that could be sort of you could pick some ideas from there and take those learnings, and that would help folks like Graeme, Mitchell, James, and the entire community here.
Yeah, I think for us, I think one of the key things that I think just to give some context about how Singapore view innovation, or how we are looking at innovation going forward, and how we kind of build up the different sectoral innovation ecosystem. So we traditionally have a very technology push approach. That means we invest money into R&D. We see we build out our capability, and then we see with this solution, what are the problems we can solve. So, and then we also realize that because of this approach, a lot of R&D money remains, a lot of this technology and IP that's created remains within the institution. It doesn't get commercialized out, it doesn't get transferred out. The transfer rate, within the society, within the industry is very low. And so what we did then is to kind of switch ourselves from a tech push approach to actually look at how can we then look at a market-led innovation. So that's where we start to go out, to look for creating more platform for co-innovation, looking for more partners, not just within Singapore, but within, globally, to look at what are some of the problem statements, who are some of these key players, and what are some of the problem statements that they are facing. So I think it's very similar to your first question about, a lot of our solutions and startup technologies tend to go around some of the problem statements that we want to solve. And because it was intentionally so, because we wanted to go out and see exactly what is the problem, and therefore the solutions that you create can then go up and solve the problem, and that is a solution that people want to pay for. So I think if I were to look back in health tech and in the area of ag tech, so I think ag tech won out of the need for Singapore to be food secure, to be food resilient. Currently, we are importing 90% of our food supply. We know that with climate change, and with all the changes in drought and the weather patterns, then our sources of supply would be affected in the long term. And that's when we start to kind of invest into more R&D, invest into developing the whole agri-tech and food tech sector. So there is a specific need that we want. We want to increase our food resilience. We set a very ambitious target, 30% of food to be grown locally by 2030. And therefore, and that's where we start to look out for international partnerships. Who are some of the people out there that can help us achieve this plan together? And what are some of the things that we need to do? I mean, Singapore is never known for agriculture. We don't have the kind of technical expertise, and that's when New Zealand came up to mind, because you guys have been really, really strong in this area. We might be looking at a different set of technology that we require. We look at urban agriculture because we don't have that kind of land, but it doesn't matter, because what we want to do is to cast the net wide, work with as many partners as we can, have many multipliers out there that we can work with, so that, you know, with every partnership that we forge, there will surely be some good ideas that come out, and then good collaborations that can be sparked, and then how we can actually put all these things together and, you know, come out with a brilliant solution. So if the key thing, takeaway that we can look at is really, you know, go out and build the network, build up the connection, look everywhere for the solutions, because you never know where the solutions will come from, and then go out and seek partnerships, and then look for partners who can kind of try, you can figure out a solution. And the last thing is really, you know, there must be a problem statement that you want to work towards. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sops, did you have anything to add? You
on the partnership, or
yeah.
I think the whole my 4 years journey has been that if one industry doesn't succeed by looking domestic, is fintech industry, unless you're China and India. Period. There's no other country has the power to succeed with using domestic market as the base. And I yesterday also shared in the smaller roundtable, 80% of global fintech are not B2C. In fact, if you compare against the capital, the startup fund available to fund this VCs, this fintech, while the 20% of the fintech portfolio have taken 80% of the capital for last 10 years, but now the things are changing. 80%, the remaining of the fintech portfolio, which are B2B, B2C, are now remarkably tapping into the same VC capital as we speak. And B2B companies are by design cross-border. They're there to serve a wide range of banking sector, financial sector, non-financial sector, to serve the digitization journey. So by design, fintech somehow is cross-border, especially for a small market like New Zealand. It has to be B2B. My friend that does a B2C, I think there's a space for that, but still, a large part of your strategy should be B2B, B2BC, which means if you want to succeed, you have to be cross-border. There's no other choice.
Yeah. And no, I agree. And you know, one of the things I was thinking about as I listened to most of the sessions today was with the Singapore FinTech Festival. Right?
Sure.
We've seen how that scaled up from, you know, your aspiration to have 1,000 in year one, and obviously it's just blown up over the next couple of years to 45,000 last year. But the fact that you've got so many of these companies from different countries coming in and talking about all the cool stuff they're doing, do you think Singapore is reaping the benefit of having that exposure to best-in-class innovation, technology, and I just see the opportunities and the number of ideas that you get in Singapore to be so much greater? Do you think that's driven by that exposure?
So actually, that was the purpose, because we could have spent a few $1 million paying a consulting company to tell us what to do, or we do a festival which is free for us and get all the good ideas. So that's what we did. We almost free. We get 130 countries, participants coming to Singapore, sharing us their journey. We get a remarkable opportunity to share, not only for ourselves, for the global community, to know what works and what we need to focus on. That's one piece. The second piece, we have focused on the FinTech Festival. If you look at even the panelists, the percentage of Singaporean contributing to that global FinTech Festival is perhaps less than 1%. In fact, we don't, by design, have local Singapore-based people speaking in that festival, because the very objective is to bring the global community together and talk about the global problem and global challenges. And that's the design. And the third aspect, if you see the Singapore FinTech Festival, there's no VIP culture, which means a minister or a startup get equal rights and equal status in that whole festival. The idea is more important, not the institution. That's why if you look at our big plenary hall, the typical first row used to be a white chair. For the VIPs, we have 0 VIP chairs. If our minister comes, they go behind. If they go late, come late to the conference. We don't announce who comes to the panelists. It's just a very open culture, open innovation, open partnership. I think that created that opportunity for us to get the global community together.
I think
I think New Zealand's character fits to that character. There's no VIP culture here. which really should work well in this ecosystem.
Yeah, we treated you like a VIP. Yeah? No, look, I think it's, and that's why I think what NZT is doing with respect to taking more and more FinTech companies to Singapore for the Singapore FinTech Festival, that becomes even more important. So a big shout out to Haley and her team for investing heavily on that.
Yes. Yes, and we are looking forward to a lot to do with New Zealand this time. And if I think one thing, because time is, I just want to ensure, when I was hearing his presentation, I was shocked by the amount of successful tech companies in New Zealand, which I was not aware. I think we should, and I agree with Haley that we should tell the story pompously.
Yeah.
I think, and one thing I would strongly beg to New Zealand ecosystem, if one company has raised a lot of capital, don't hide it. One thing we saw in early part of FinTech ecosystem Singapore, people who have raised a lot of capital were very secretive about that. They thought if they discuss, they will lose those investors to somebody else. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. The best way to get more capital is to share your success to as many people. And I want to leave that insights to all of you. If there is a company here who has raised a lot of capital, don't be secretive about it. Share with people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's, unless we tell that story, you're not going to get exposed to that level of investors, right?
And you don't inspire people to come to the space. And by the liquidity is plenty. Let me add, there's a lot of money. They don't know where to spend.
Yeah.
So you're going to tell your story beyond one or two success.
So I'm not sure if many people are aware, but the largest foreign direct investor in, well, maybe I'll do that as a trivia. Does anyone know which country is the largest foreign direct investor into India? Come on, just give it a go. No? Oh, come on. Everyone's waiting for a drink. It's Singapore. Yeah, so there's plenty of capital. I can tell you from my experience, there's plenty of capital, but beyond that, if I share some of the experiences, I know this is not my time to be sharing the mic, but I have to tell that story because Haley insisted we tell the stories. So, working with Enterprise Singapore, we had a meeting with the deputy CEO of Enterprise Singapore about 3 months ago, and we walked into this room, and there was about 15 people in that room, and all 15 of them had very clear mandates in terms of what they do to support Singapore headquartered companies. I'm not Singaporean, but it was a Singapore company. Now, we left that meeting, and there was just clear support structures built for us. We've never taken a grant from the government. We've been private equity funded for some time, and we never felt the need. But as we started to explore new avenues, it was the Enterprise Singapore team that came to us and said, you guys have a great technology platform, and you should get your IP piece covered. And I said, well, we've done some of it. They said, it should be done better, right? Because IPs, it's a very loose, it could be as loose as you want, and it could be as inclusive as you want. We went and met, they recommended we go see a IP lawyer. We went and met her, and wow, she just blew us away. Basically, what we're working on now is a foolproof 100% IP, trademark, and patent protection program that's going to run over 2 years. And Enterprise Singapore, and I hope I'm allowed to share this. Enterprise Singapore will typically, I think it's public, Enterprise Singapore will fund 70% of that program, right? So it enables Singapore companies. It's not just about building a technology. One of the things I learned was you've got to run, even if you're a startup, you've got responsibilities. You've got responsibilities to your customers, your employees, and the government. So you've got to fulfill those responsibilities, and you've got to protect yourself. So from day one, we made sure we had, even if we were a startup, we had a top law firm, we had a top audit firm, because we were accountable to our investors, and we made sure that we had all the right insurance and protections as we go into different markets. We made sure that we were GDPR compliant before some of our big global competitors were. And part of that learning process comes through the support structure that we get from, and some of the thought process that's shared with Singapore startups. So I think there's a tremendous amount of work that's going behind that innovation ecosystem. MAS, Enterprise Singapore. So this year, the Switch, and Switch is the festival run by Enterprise Singapore, and you got the Singapore FinTech Festival run by MAS, and they've come together this year. So it'll be a good showing. So I'm going to switch over to Graeme. Graeme, what do you think we can do to tell better stories? It's precious on you, man. You're the CEO of NZTech.
So start telling them, basically. Like every week I meet a new tech company that I'm blown away by. We get probably, I think, somewhere between 6 and 10 new members a week, and so I try and get around and see a few of them. And every week I go, how come I haven't heard of you? Like in my job, how come? And it's a cultural thing we got to get over. We just keep hearing that message from Hayley all the time.
Can I dock you some points on Hayley's behalf?
Yeah.
You run Tech Week. Had 40,000 people at Tech Week, 600 events. I didn't hear you mention that. I mean, we're talking about Singapore FinTech Festival, 45,000 people. I didn't hear you talk about the New Zealand Tech Week. I mean, that was a great festival over a week. So there you go.
There you go. Example taken. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. So one of the strategies we had to try and raise the profile in New Zealand of tech was to run a thing called Tech Week, where we felt that there were a lot of events on, but it was discoordinated, and we certainly couldn't run them all. So instead we worked with the government, got a little bit of support funding, and with the industry, put it all together, and we built a platform, basically. And then we contracted 38 towns and cities around the country, lined up the government's key strategic tech strategies with ours and with the cities, and then we basically managed to run just under 600 events across 7 days in 38 towns around helping expose kids in schools to technology, helping small businesses take up more technology, creating tech hubs in different cities, improving Māori access and integration and experience of technology, and then in Auckland showcasing some of our best internationally. So got some delegations in, but yeah, okay. Proof point. It's just not in our culture to blag on. We had 55,000 people attend those events.
Get a nifty PR firm.
Yeah,
they'll do a good job. Yeah. Now, look, I think there's a lot of good stories to be told, and you know that, and Hayley knows I tell a lot of those stories when I present in Singapore about New Zealand, and I tried not to eat into your slides, Graeme, because I tell the same stories. But I'm going to shift over to Mitchell, because Mitchell, you've had, so obviously you're the chair of NZTech and FinTech New Zealand as well, but you've also had a very successful foray into Asia for a number of years. I mean, what are some of the things that you've done well? Because we know that you've got a development center in Vietnam and you've got customers in Asia. First of all, what prompted you to do that, and how's that working out for you in terms of that foray?
Okay, thank you. My business, the Augen Software Group, we are 26 years old here in New Zealand, and we've been in Southeast Asia for 14 years. And the reason that we had to expand out of New Zealand was simply out of necessity at the time. Now, New Zealand tech sector as a whole faces many challenges, and some of the top challenges include lack of tech talent. Investment capital is again a challenge, and of course, large international markets. And in our case, we were facing acute challenges around tech talent, and that was 14 years ago. And today, the challenge is even more so acute because there are way more tech companies in New Zealand today, trying to employ local talent and trying to attract international talent into the country. So we thought, well, to do this, we've really got to leverage our own connections. Certainly myself, back into Asia, in my case, it's Vietnam, to build a capability. It took us several years to kind of learn how to make that work because, again, in order to do that, one of the things that many Kiwi tech companies need to improve on or build more capability of is around cultural intelligence. Now that might sound a little bit, wishy-washy, but I assure you it is not, especially in tech, especially in fast-moving IP-based, types of business and the type of work and the type of projects that we do. It is so easy to misunderstand each other culturally, and that's where things get expensive. So that was a kind of an issue driver to kind of break out of the mold to solve and address one of the problems. And since then, we've tried to leverage that and offer that in working together with NZTE and MFAT to create a place in Southeast Asia where other Kiwi tech companies can tap into what we've built. But I think one thought I would really like to leave from all of my experiences in doing business in Asia is kind of this. Asian markets, or Asians are not stupid. And what do I mean by that? Before you laugh. Over decades of engaging with foreign Western companies you look at Southeast Asia or Singapore, Vietnam, Asia as a whole, today consumers and businesses in Asia can actually tell the difference between Western companies who go into Asia to extract value versus Western companies who go in to co-create value, right? They're very, very astute about that now. So for us, the reason we're successful today is because we've actually been in the market for 14 years, and we've had to really shown our commitment of, hey, we're here permanently, we're not going anywhere soon. And not only that we're here, we're present, but we're also engaging. We care about the whole tech ecosystem in Southeast Asia, so we take part in it. So engagement, presence plus engagement makes us relevant. I think that's probably the overarching thing that I've got kind of time to share.
Yeah, no, look, and I think that that touches on a point that I'd like to elaborate on a little bit and probably get maybe some views from SOPs or whoever. And some of this may sometimes start to sort of tread into politically sensitive areas, but I don't think we've got any politicians here. The minister left in the morning, so I think one of the things that I see less of here, and trust me, I interact with a lot of New Zealand startups. My team interacts with a lot of New Zealand startups when they come up to Singapore or when we come down to New Zealand. And we're still not, I'm still, as an analyst, I'm still not convinced that there's enough focus on Asia. Enough focus on Asia. I think it seems like everyone feels that, the markets to go to are still, the Americas and Europe, and the fact is they're dead. They're trying to come to Asia, and if you see the kind of growth and the energy, I mean, if you go to Ho Chi Minh City and you see the energy in that city, it is just unbelievable. I was at, I was with the chairman of NASSCOM in India, and I mean, the Indians know a thing or two about tech, and we had discussions around a whole bunch of things, and basically they said, Amit, there's one thing we'd like you to help us with is what's going on in Vietnam, because we're seeing Vietnam as being one of our biggest threats, because we're seeing a lot of development work that's going on in there. So there's a lot of really good stuff, and there's a lot of originality that's coming out. They're not rip-offs. There's a lot of very original ideas coming out of there. I think there's a lot of capital. There's a lot of energy. I think one of the things that I find Singapore has a huge advantage is Singapore is truly a global melting pot of talent. So Singapore's probably one of the most, well, I've got two things. One is Singapore supports local talent, puts a lot of weight behind that. So again, what I mean by that is Singapore has some of the best universities, well, definitely the best rated universities in Asia, and among the top 20 in the world. And I think there's a couple of them. And there's a huge focus from the government to make sure that local talent is picked up. And in areas like data science, and David's here, he'll probably tell you if you have a chat with him over a cocktail, the government actually co-funds startups, and not just startups, but even companies, to encourage them to try on that talent. At the same time, Singapore also has a very, very pragmatic open policy around making sure they bring in best-in-class leadership talent. And so it's not, Singapore does not, as I gave you the example, supporting a company that's set up by a non-Singaporean, in the same way, Singapore doesn't build its economy based on just Singaporeans contributing to it. There's a lot of co-creation, and there's a lot of foreign talent that comes in. And I think that allows that huge exposure to Singapore to learn new ways, new things. It's people like Gerald who go up from New Zealand who are contributing because they bring the Kiwi way of doing things, and then you've got someone coming in from the US or someone coming in from India or China or Japan, and I think that really helps. So how can some of that learning, because New Zealand's disadvantage is that it's not the openness to that, it's the tyranny of distance. So how can some of that be absorbed into the New Zealand ecosystem as well?
I think the answer lies after this presentation.
Yeah.
So
I was teeing it up for that.
So I think we don't have to answer. At least for my sake, the answer lies in what Naveen is going to talk about. He will explain to you how you can get to the global market. So I'll keep my case silent here.
All right. Well, we've got 5 seconds left. Any last words of wisdom, Graeme? You always have them.
Yeah, I would just say more of this. So, bringing New Zealanders into the Singapore market, so the FinTech Week, and finding opportunities to bring people down to here, Tech Week or things like this. It's these exchanges, these connections, that we're still people. People do business with people, right? So it's the connections that creates the spark for the new idea.
And if I can just add on, I think this is actually a very good start, for us to share about, for us to learn about NZ coming down here to share about Switch, to share about the FinTech Festival. I mean, it is this kind of conversation that gets the relationship starts, and it doesn't end here, and that's how the conversation gets started, and more partnership gets formed after this. So,
yeah, that's fantastic. And Graeme, you just keep telling those stories. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot. Thanks very much.
Thank you.